My name is Irfan Ahmed, and I'm an anthropologist working at Max Planck Institute in Germany. So this is a simple question related to the previous session as well as the current one. I'm just wondering, because the focus is on countering violent extremism, preventing violent extremism or terrorism on the one hand, and human rights. Now the background paper says that you cannot have a definition of, or there is no agreed universal definition of terrorism, but we do have a definition of human rights, and that has not been led to the member state. But in the case of violent extremism, there is no universal definition, and it is left to the member state. So my simple question is, why this discrepancy? And do you have conceptual as well as policy-oriented response to this question?
Yep. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My name is Mridul and I'm Asia coordinator of Europe Peace Builders. I have one small correction, which is so Ma'am was talking about pull and push factors. So it says like Buddhist Hindus and Buddhist extremism is increasing, is rising in India and Myanmar. So it should be respectively, like Hinduism is rising in India and Buddhism in Myanmar. It's like not both, in both. The second is there's just this question. So let's say when we talk about social media is being exploited by ISIL, and at the same time, sometimes countries in the conflict regions stop the social media uses for the all human beings there in that region. So how to do that kind of reconciling, how to have that kind of reconciling network? So reconciling the mindset. So that's a question. And another question to the man is, how can so used? So I want to understand how it can be misused.
And then response.
Thank you. Shafkat Mahmood is my name, and I'm from Pakistan. We've been working in the field of peace building and conflict resolution mostly for the last 15 years in de-radicalization. Taliban, Jabal, Daesh. My own experience goes into two basic facts which I have little concerned, and both these facts have been pointed out by you. One is that the state terrorism is always there, and Santiago has mentioned that in one of our recommendations, but I think we do have to do much more to look at the state terrorism, in which whether it is supported or it is sponsored, or in the other sense it energizes that. The other aspect which I think that the theme also has got all the four major discussion points tomorrow, and I think that probably children we have missed out. In prevention, I think we do have to look at children. And I feel in particular in my own country that there are madrasas, there are small children who have become radicalized straight away from home, straight away from the schools, from the madrasas. So we probably have to look at that level, that prevention, the base of prevention should be those schools also. So that consideration must be kept in mind. Thank you.
Yeah, let's hear and then I'll come back to you and you. Please. You'd like to start.
So, in terms of the discrepancy for the definition, there was a question about why there's a definition of human rights and then there's no definition for terrorism or radicalisation. Well, there's a big debate about that, and I think there's a trend now internationally to create a definition for terrorism and radicalisation. I think the problem from a legal perspective will be the convergence of the different case law and the jurisdictions and how you prosecute an act that could be classified. as one, so there's a lot of complexities around that, whereas the human rights definition, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, doesn't go down that legal implications and complications in terms of the legal structure of the different nations. So that's quite technical, but that's one of the reasons that's been challenging. But also it's a recent phenomenon. So after the Second World War, we had the debate about human rights. That was the trigger. We had a definition in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it remained abstract and not. It's not necessary for the states to have like internal laws that will make sure that they are compliant in a kind of narrow legal sense. But it's informative, right? Doing that or that, it's a lot more challenging. But there's a way to do that. There's a big debate about it. My question to you is whether the law alone and the definition alone can resolve the problem. Because we put so much emphasis on this debate about a definition for terrorism and radicalisation, but we forget about the other stuff, and as if the definition will resolve the problem. In my view, we've had definitions of many other crimes. Hate crime has never been defined. It's only just been defined in the UK. Domestic violence has never been defined, but we know what domestic violence is, we know what hate crime is, and we know the underlying causes for domestic violence and for hate crimes. These are complex phenomena. And on my background, I'm a human rights lawyer, so when it comes to definition, when it comes to the law, with complex phenomena, the more you try to define them, the more difficult it becomes to prosecute. So my question back is whether the definition in a legal context will resolve the problem, or whether the policies and the structures that create the underlying causes of this complex phenomenon is the right way to go about it. So that's my question back to you, and as I said, we're not here to provide all the answers, but also to stimulate the debate and provide you with questions. So that's something probably to talk about. In terms of reconciling the mindsets, so you've got the security mindset and the human rights mindset. Again, from experience and having worked in the public sector or the civil service and then in the NGO sector, what people like are to see real case studies, things working, and examples, which is why we're asking for examples. And if you know examples where the human rights values and practices have been used for preventing, but also controlling violent extremism, I think this is the best way to reconcile the mindsets. This is where we can see the unicorn. This unicorn that never exists, but it's out there, and it's somewhere, and we want to see it. It's out there, yeah? And it's about bringing those examples to light, and hopefully this seminar will bring those examples to light. So when we hear about a project in Germany that works with migrant and refugees using human rights education in local communities, and this is how it has prevented young people going down the road, that is the unicorn. That is how you reconcile the mindsets. The same in Afghanistan, or so on and so forth. If you get the real examples that are out there in communities, I think we should start to unpack this complex phenomenon. And about children and prevention, yes, education, very important. I think we're going to talk about it extensively. There is a specific workshop on young people, but like the previous speakers said, there is a caveat. When we speak about young people, let's not present the topic as young people are the issue, but let's look at it holistically. Young people are the solution, and it's that mentality. What do we do when we work, or we see, or we support a young person who is at risk of violent radicalisation? Do we see them as risks, and we're trying to manage them by putting them in sort of institutions or prisons, or penalise them? Or are we trying to find their talents and tap into those talents and nurture those talents so that they can focus their energy where it's constructive and positive? And this is the sort of things that I'm talking about in terms of mentality and bringing the two together, because this is what human rights are all about. It's about sharing power. And if us as adults, as teachers, as policymakers, as researchers, as professors, are looking down on children and young people and trying to minimize the risk of them becoming radicalized, we will continue the same narrative. If we bring ourselves down and share our power and empower the young people, the women, those communities that feel the need to come to court to do what they need to do, then we're talking about a different narrative.
About state terrorism, I think that is getting more and more into the conversation, precisely because we've now shifted from the concept of war on terror to preventing violent extremism. And the more we talk about it, and now that it's in the conversation, then we can do something about it. Doing something about it is not as easy as all that, because even getting an agreed definition is very difficult on terrorism and violent extremism. And the reason it is very difficult to get an agreement on definitions is precisely because of national interests. So national interests get in the way of an agreement on something. So that's the reason why the UN, the Secretary General said, we leave it to you, we leave it to the member states to decide. Because the there is a problem of conflicting national interests. So that again, and with the, you know that in the UN, that's how it plays out. So the people, that's where participation of the public, of people, is very necessary. That you just don't leave it to the member states to make sure that there's an agreed definition, because that's precisely what's been happening. So, because the states are very conflicting interests, the UN says, okay, it's up to you now to make your own definition, but that's the reason why I insist that key to all of this is really people's participation. It's really about voice. It's really about influence. Who influences whom and who makes the decision is, to me, a very important element of preventing violent extremism. That's why when you look at push and pull factors, why do people really want to blow themselves up? You know, why do they want to do that? So if you go deeper into the psyche of many of these, there's human rights violations involved, there's grievances involved, but there's really, this is one way I get listened to. So to me, if we leave decisions like agreements on definitions that have a matter, that really matter to our lives, if we leave it to just the states to decide, or our governments to decide, I think that's a very slippery slope. And I'm glad that the idea of state terrorism is getting into the conversation.
Thank you, Lance. And then let's see here. I have Madam there, and then I have, oh, this is, we start with, yes, you were first, and then the gentleman over there, and then it was you. Yeah.
Thank you very much to both speakers. I'm Rima. I'm from Singapore. I do lead a human rights group called Dignity. In Malay, it's called Marwa. I am very bowled over by that chart that you put up on security rights and human rights. We have invested a lot in security, and the flag that we fly is that, we do not have any act of terror in recent times. I also feel that part of the prevention, it is up for discussion, should be that we should reconcile to the fact that one day or another, sadly, it can happen and might happen, whatever the definition of an act of terror is. And it is important for a population to get to a point of getting it happen, let's get on with life, and let's not lose our solidarity and social cohesion, because too much money, as has been presented, etc., has gone into securitization, and that is a violation in its own way of human rights, privacy, etc. So the question that I have is this. I love the stuff about always to deal with new wars. I'm writing up a paper on genocide, and actually it's always and old wars, Genghis Khan and everything. We have had it in our history, and we are going back to the whole thing is repeating in many different forms, only perhaps with newer weapons and faster weapons and more bullets coming at you and more tiny bombs that explode and kill a lot of people. So the question is, I love that bit about local to national to regional to international. I talk now about ASEAN and maybe whoever wishes to answer. ASEAN has, the state of affairs in ASEAN is that we do not have a very strong regional human rights portfolio. And there are countries in ASEAN that do struggle at various levels of democracy and respecting human rights. And yet we have trans-border conflict issues. How are we going to move towards a gender-based approach? I think is something that I would like maybe for tomorrow, the discussion that I think some of our countries are not really going to move very strongly on the rights space, but can we beef up the regional mechanism, and if so, how? Thank you.
Thank you. I am Gus Iklat. I'm from trying to be a non-violent extremist and a non-violent radical. And I think this is the points that have been brought about, and I'm glad that Theo touched on this, that we need not to conflate radicalism, extremism, and terrorism. This is sometimes very dangerous, all the time very dangerous when we conflate these terms. And that is why I propose that we be conscious and be mindful of these things. And so you suggested that we think out of the box, and Irene says we turn the tables, and I'll try to do that now. And when you had a slide there where the lightning slide, 0.01% people in the UK will be hit by lightning and 0.03% by terrorism. What if you use the same formula in Syria, Palestine, and Afghanistan? How many percent would be hit by bombs from the drones, missiles from Israel, bombs or ordnance from Western powers? And this is what Mahmoud brought up and I touched on, and even Ms. Gilmer touched on. About state terrorism. Why can't we talk more about violent extremism of states also? And compare this now to what you presented. We will all be talking tomorrow about preventing VE of this 0.03%. Why not talk about the bigger percentage of people being killed by this kind of terrorism?
Thank you. My name is Faisal Bashar. So I have one question for Theo and one for Irene. So for Theo, my question is, given the very, very, very small number of casualties that are suffered in Western countries from any kind of terrorism, you know, whether it's ISIS, Al-Qaeda, right-wing, lump them all together, you're talking about a minuscule number of casualties. Why is Europe so focused on violent extremism? And do you think they're spending the right amount of money on it? And my question for Irene is, when you look at the peace-building development sector, as you said, they already have long years of experience. They've been doing this work for decades. What is the value added for these programs of a countering violent extremism framework? Does it do anything for them other than provide a way for donors who can say this is security spending to funnel money in there?
I just realized that there are very many questions. We take one more and then we have the last round, and I know that, yes, I think that either of you wanted, Lynn, you wanted, we have Lynn, we have Vietnam there, we have Pekka, and then, yes, that will be so quite, Lynn, and then we'll take the answers, and then we take the final round.
Thanks a lot. Lynn Davis, University of Birmingham, also
such an organisation doing training and research on extremism and exploitation with young people. I have a question, a genuine question, which I'm struggling with, and it's about victimhood. And I was interested to see the chart about who are the victims, because that's one of the questions of definition: who decides what is a victim? We're finding we've made films of, well, just recently, two mothers: a mother of a son who was killed in Manchester Marine bombings, and a mother whose son went to ISIS and was killed. And there's a debate amongst doing a program with testimonials and using testimonials of survivors. And some survivors are saying these aren't victims. Mothers of sons who went to ISIS are not victims. We are the victims. So it's a question about, first of all, about who decides who is a victim and victimhood, and whether the whole discourse around victims is part of the problem. But then also trying to put together the two things, about war on terror and human rights. Is there a distinction between victims of terror and victims of human rights abuses? Are they the same sort of thing, or should we keep them separate? Or, as some people argue in the legal sense, that it's just about crimes, and therefore everyone is a victim of crime, or in the strategies that we're using, should we still keep them distinct in terms of extremism and victims of other sorts of abuses? So I'm genuinely torn between those two positions.
Thank you very much for the questions. I think the debate has started properly now. So I just take Faiz's question, which I think in a way has been answered by your question or your intervention. And again, this is my kind of personal view here. Why does the European Union or Europe focus so much on violent extremism and terrorism when the percentages are so small? And those percentages are not just in the UK, these are percentages in the entire European Union. So every 100,000 people in the European Union, those were the rates that you get, so cancer and so on. Why? Because one of the reasons was shared by the Asian colleague to create destruction. So there is far bigger issues that we should be paying attention to. So we need to pay attention to other issues that are becoming issues because of the images that we're being presented with, and continue the narrative of division and continue the narrative of destruction. That's my very personal view, but also what I have been observing through my research and the projects that I've been looking at. And what is human rights? As I said, it's all about power sharing. It's about bringing every individual on the same platform and saying, independently of who you are, of who you want to be, we're all human beings and we all share the same value. You're not worth more than I'm worth, and we should be respecting you as much as you're respecting me. When you raise that issue, certain people are not comfortable with that. And the sharing of power has been always been the biggest enemy of human rights and all the issues that we're trying to talk about and address here, the sharing of power. So you have to ask yourself, who sets those policies? Whose power is going to be compromised? So that's first part of the answer. The second part of the answer, and I'm saying this as from my personal experience, and I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to share. When I was a civil servant, I wasn't able to speak my mind, but that's been 15 years now, so I suppose I can speak my mind. And I was a human rights advisor, and I think we shared this in the taxi yesterday, and I was kind of half asleep, so I'm not half asleep now, so I was sharing consciously. I was a human rights advisor of the minister at the time, and it was not after, it was very close to 2005 when the bombings took place. And my job as a human rights advisor and as a strategist, first thing is in the morning was to get the newspapers, and I'm not talking about the Observer, I'm talking about the Daily Mail, talking about the Sun, and make sure there is nothing in there about human rights that the human rights minister needs to know and respond to those whatever things the headlines were saying. Why am I saying this? Because political priorities is what defines the strategies. And it doesn't matter whether at the end of the day, you and I identify the issue, we're talking about strategies and politics and all this sort of stuff. The political priorities is what certain times would drive the strategies and the money policies that we're talking about. So that's kind of the second part of the answer, which I might not like and I'm comfortable with. I'm sharing that again from experience. Lynn's question about victims and victimhood. Niels Christie, somebody from Scandinavia many years ago, a victimologist, was trying to say that about this perfect victim. Who is the perfect victim? And everybody started talking about who's the victim, the perfect victim. And that debate continues, especially in the restorative justice field where I come from. Who is the victim? Who is the offender? And I just said, can we just stop the labels and just remove the labels that the criminal justice system has created for a reason? Because when you go to court, you need to identify the victim, you need to identify the offender, and then give them respective rights. In this occasion, and we've got probably back to the issue of definitions, where there are no laws and there are no courts where victims and offenders will come and testify and so on. Do I need to define the victim? And do I need to define the offender? Are we all offenders? Now we're all victims. And that's again probably for discussion for tomorrow. But in doing so, if we are trying to define victims, I had to look at the literature and provide all four different types of victims, including the family members of those who end up being radicalized. Because by excluding those victims, we're not walking the talk. We're just carrying on the narrative of division. How can we have this debate that we're all talking about, this dialogue that we're all talking about, if we forget those victims? Gender-based approaches, I think Irene's far better place to say about why and how to do better gender-based approaches. As I said, the issue of gender, but also all sorts of other issues are issues of inequality, and these are not issues that we experience just in one country. It's a general issue of society, which is what brings me back to those three categories of divide. It's not about the children, the young people, or the individual. It's also the society. It's also you and I. And the fabric of society is not one that acknowledges gender equality yet. And we'll have a long way to go. And the first point was about finance and security. Again, I think that's connected with the other issues and how human rights compliant that is, spending so much money on security. I've already said what I said about political priorities and about destruction, but again, I have to go back to that security mindset, because the end of the day, you want to go to bed and feel protected. You want to go to bed and say, my government has done enough, they put the levels up of threats, and they have enough whatever spies or whatever they need to have to make sure that I'm not bombed. At the end of the day, that's the priority. So that debate is legitimate. And when we're having our conversations tomorrow, please remember that too. The question is, what are the models and what is the level of contribution that we're making for both? Not just for the security measures, but also for alleviating the pain that creates by financing those security measures.
So just two things, gender and ASEAN. I run a campaign, and the title is Women Seriously. For women to be taken seriously. Because if women are taken seriously, another world is possible. And that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow in the workshop on gender. It's a lot of, we have to discuss femininities and masculinities. And the whole perspective on security, whose security, what kind of security, that has gender implications and gender perspectives. And there's not enough of that discussion going on in PVD. So that we need to discuss. And the last one, and it's going to be very short, is what's the value added of peace building and development? And you know, I like 3, but now I have 5. And it's PEACE. P is for people's participation. E for economic security. A for acceptance of identities. C for choices. And E for enduring values. So those 5, I think the peace building communities and the development people know that those are the things that are at the very root of violent extremism. Again, people's participation, economic security, acceptance of identities, choices, and enduring values. And when we talk of choices, it just dawned on me the other day, I was reading something, it dawned on me that we have started to think in terms of either or. Either this or that. You know, so that's why there's us and them. We think in those terms. Instead of both and end. And it is possible to think both of us and both of us and. So, and it occurred to me how simple that was. You know? From either or to both and. But how difficult it is in real life. And how all this hate speech, all this stems from that. So where is that coming from? where are the enduring values that we're talking about? That will make sure that it is both and end. And how difficult is that? And when we look at what's happening in this world, it's increasingly becoming that. So where is the change going to come from? I really very much think, as I started to say in the last slide, that concepts mean a lot. It determines how you behave. When Theo talks about mindsets, that's where it comes from. That's the script. You live out that script. So that's why I cannot, some people say it's very difficult to focus on content. It is important because you behave according to the concept, the belief, the mindset that you have. And so I think if we start thinking in those terms, concept, that's the reason why in this world, in this room, if I can tell you, most of the things we do is technical. Because it's the easy part. Skill building. I call it capacity building galore. Everybody is trained. For example, for women are trained to become mediators. I said, so, do you have many skillful mediators? Are they asked to be mediators? So, the technical part is the easy part. The difficult parts are the conceptual part and the political part. The political part is the influencing part. And that's my own take, for example, on the women's movement. The women's movement weakened because it became a technical issue. It became gender mainstreaming. So who took over? All the consultants took over. But we came from a political movement. So now, there is a need to go back to political organizing, mobilizing, influencing. That's the thing that we need to do. So the fact that our world today, we have marginalized so many groups, and there's an ascendance of a very masculine dominance and a language of division. I think we have to start thinking of the kinds of words and the kinds of concepts we need to have in order to bring us whole again. Thank you.
Okay, I stick to the promise. First is Pekka, then gentleman, and lastly you. Unfortunately, those were the. Do we have any mic?
Thank you very much. My name is Pekka, so I'm an ambassador for peace facilitation back in Helsinki, but also I'm part of the team for the implementation of the prevention of violent extremism in Finland. My question would relate to two issues: media and then social media. Theo, you made some reference to the media. I think the kind of discussion here, what we are having, I don't see this in the media. Where are they? Shouldn't we have one discussion about that, what they are doing? You mentioned those kind of like lower class media presentations, but I have an example of a very good report, the Demystifying the ISIL's Gendered Messaging. Maybe you have heard of this report. But the high class media in your half-native UK basically refuses to talk about the findings of this. I've talked with the researcher. So this is just kind of like a case that the media, either they don't understand or they don't want to talk about the findings that we have in the hand. And second question relating to social media. We are now here, of course, protecting human rights, but I'm very happy that we have actually a first court case in Finland where two men who were spreading hate speech in the net got a 2 years prison sentence. But this is a very critical issue. I know that many UK professors are completely against looking at this way. But how then otherwise can we control the social media? How long can we let things go until we find a way to deal with it? Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Brian Gormley, and I work for the Committee on the Administration of Justice, CAJ, in Northern Ireland. Just to note that in the programme I'm down as being from Ireland, which is no problem to me, but when I left Belfast 48 hours ago, Northern Ireland was still part of the UK. The people of Ireland as a whole have a right to change that, but so far they've not exercised that right, just for the record. A couple of quick comments, if I may. I was struck by the statistic that a half of the deaths from terrorism in the last period have been in the UK. I think it's significant and unfortunate that according to the programme, there is no official representative from the UK at this session, and I think that's disappointing. It could be, of course, that the UK is a bit Janus-faced on human rights and fighting terrorism, in other words, looking both ways, because on the one hand, there is an extremely draconian piece of new legislation going through Parliament at the minute, which offends against freedom of expression and also gives new powers on the Irish border. On the other hand, they have presided over a peace process in Northern Ireland, which, insofar as it's been successful for the last 20 years, is because of its human rights content, and the extent to which it hasn't been successful is because of its unfulfilled human rights commitments. I suppose we're going to spend the rest of this conference chasing looking for the unicorn that was spoken of. I think there's been outlines and glimmerings and the odd sighting of that unicorn in the fields and streets of Northern Ireland, so I look forward to the discussion.
Hi, thanks. My name is Carol Dalton and I'm from the Embassy of Ireland. We didn't team up, but I did want to reference obviously the example of Northern Ireland as a somewhat successful human rights-based approach for attacking terrorism, albeit somewhat of an old school type of terrorism and one that hasn't explicitly been referenced here today. One of the jobs of the Embassy and the Irish Mission Network around the world is to promote tourism in Ireland as a whole, and that has come as an initiative of the peace process from 20 years ago, where economic prosperity was obviously a key, or seen as a key identifying factor to solve the terrorism question there. What the agreement did have, and one of the main reasons it has been successful, is obviously sincere political will from both sides, which is obviously lacking in a lot of case studies that are currently unfolding at the minute. And it's very interesting to see, Theo, especially your presentation, and thank you both for them, they were fantastic, about the democratic deficit and the advantages of just not bothering dealing with these properly. But also Irene and the other speakers who were on earlier, the consistent messaging that there is a very strong role for local civil society to play. However, you can't have both at the same time. A democratic deficit does not cultivate strong local civil society. So I'm just wondering, how do you view the health of local civil society in your respective regions at the minute? And given the context that we're in, the ever-changing pressures on democracy, and I suppose the ever-decreasing appreciation among outside actors, such as us that are not necessarily at risk of becoming terrorists, the decreasing appreciation of democratic institutions and processes that has led to some of these upheavals and cleavages today.
Thanks very much. Now I will not, unfortunately not, will have it either bilateral or in the working groups tomorrow. Theo, if you can, and Irene, if you can give some short answers.
Okay. The power of the media, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, huge topic there. It cannot be resolved with my simple answer. What I would say is that the media and the power that comes with it can be used both in a positive way and in a negative way. And there are various examples of having been used in a very negative way, including sending or organising. Some of the attacks in London were organised through social media. So direct involvement of social media for organising attacks. But if we're talking about prevention, social media, and look at the projects out there, the youth projects, are amazing when it comes to prevention. So it's how we use the media for good and not for bad, while respecting freedom of speech, which is a basic value of human rights and very much protected by human rights, which is why not everybody agrees with the decision, because where you draw the line is a very slippery slope. The same issue with Paris and what happened there. In terms of our legislation and going through Parliament and having more strict legislation, as I said before, you can have all the definitions in the world. You can define hate crime, you can define domestic violence, but if you don't address the underlying causes and the attitudes that lead to those events, even in the court of law, those decisions would not resolve the problem. And again, this is an acknowledgement of the Council of Europe, in terms of the legal approach to radicalisation. I just came back from a training they're trying to set up for the judiciary, so legal professionals, court judges and prosecutors, on radicalisation and human rights. Because when a case goes to court, they're trying to create this training and this awareness raising, how to deal with those cases when the law is not there or is there. And there was a representative in this training from the UK government, who was the advisor of the UK government for setting up this legislation that just passed. What do they do in terms of acknowledging the issue as a holistic issue, as opposed to this is the act, this is how we need to penalise it, this is how we're going to deal with it. There's an acknowledgement, I wouldn't say by all member states, but there's an acknowledgement at least at the Council of Europe statement came with the European Commission to create this training. Hopefully will increase awareness. Northern Ireland, right? I think it's a fantastic example for Europe when it comes to democratic engagement and finding solutions. The terrorist attacks 20 years ago, trust me, it wasn't 0.03 rates in the European Union, were much higher. And we're talking about a lot of activity within one country in Europe. And again, it wasn't the strategies and the strict laws and the penalisation of those terrorists that caused those deaths and those casualties that resolved the problem. Is the reconciliation, is the committees, the work on the ground, good fighters agreements, negotiating, and that's what led to the attacks terrorist attacks are being calmed down, why we're not looking at those constructive ways of resolving the issue, and we're actually replicating the mistakes. Again, that probably goes back to your question. You know, why is this being done when we know what the outcome is? And finally, in terms of democratic engagement and the democratic deficit, Irene spoke about, you know, the underlying causes for this, and I think what we also have to acknowledge is the opportunities. Yeah? So today is an opportunity. This seminars 18 times were supported by governments, were supported by the European Commission. It is an opportunity for democratic engagement. It's a platform. The question is, are we just preaching the converted, or are we trying, us as representatives of those opportunities, cascading the messages and what we're learning to the communities and where the democratic engagement needs to take place, in schools, in universities, in all sorts of places, that will then make a difference for that change and that shift to happen.
Yeah, I know you want this to end. You know, I'm trained as a journalist, so I'm looking at what's happening in media, and I'm going, you know, when I went to journalism school, you know, my professor would probably say, "What are you doing, Irene, when I editorialize?" But what is happening in media is that it's been weaponized, and especially social media. And I think that we need to, there needs to be a really fulsome discussion about where social media is going with this weapon and with its capacity to weaponize. I think naming it that way makes us know what it is we're against, that it's being used as a weapon. Okay, so that's important. And a lot of the questions here can be, you know, put up and discussed tomorrow in a more fulsome way. But so I just want to say, as my last word, that it is significant. The shift from war on terror to preventing violent extremism, it opens possibilities for civil society to come in. Now, it's never given to us. You know, civil society is not. You know, you have to claim it. So we see in various parts of the world that people are claiming that their space, but not enough. I think there needs to be more of that. So I think that just the fact that you believe that you have to claim because it's not given to you, then you struggle, you know, to open that space for yourselves because it's not going to be just given to you. So that's my last word.
Thank you very much, Irene and Theo, for your presentation and also for this enriching Q&A session. And now I